Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I have a bill 2025 RS 0346 on behalf of Charter Communications. This bill concerns the forced relocation of telecommunications facilities when highway and road projects are built in the state of Kansas.
Okay, is there any questions, committee? You might state your name on there too, but I don't know how important that is, but
Blaine Finch on behalf of Charter Communications.
thank you. Okay, we will consider and introduce. Thank you. Okay, excited today. We have a presentation on the Grain Belt Express, and we have an introduction by Kimberly Jinker, Swati, Advanced Power Lines. Thank you for being here and setting this up, Kimberly, and I'm going to turn this over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Vice Chair and Madam Ranking Member. I appreciate the opportunity to be here before you today. My name is Kimberly Ginter-Swati. I do represent the Advanced Power Alliance, and Invenergy is one of our members, and they are the developer of what's called the Grain Belt Express transmission line. They also have generation facilities in the state of Kansas as well. And so I'm going to cede my time, if it's okay, to have those individuals with Invenergy that do this day in and day out be able to speak to you on absolutely the specifics about the Grain Belt Express. But the one thing I would say is that this is a project that I've been working on for 15 years. And I can say that innovative projects take time to build, and infrastructure projects take a lot of time to build. And an innovative infrastructure project takes even more time to build. So when you hear numbers like 10 or 12 years, don't be super alarmed. It's an infrastructure project, and it's an innovative infrastructure project, so it takes a little bit more time. So we have Mr. Patrick Whitty, who is the Senior Vice President of Development for Invenergy, or for transmission policy with Invenergy, and he's going to speak. But also in the room will be Meredith Abdu, who is the Vice President of Generation, and then Brad Panazik, who's the Vice President of Transmission Development, as well as Mr. Kevin Quinn. So all of them are excellent resources and available to you, but Mr. Patrick Whitty is who will be doing the bulk of the speaking. So if it's okay, I'll turn it over to Patrick.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Mr. Vice Chairman, Madam Ranking Member, and members of the committee. My name is Patrick Whitty. I'm Senior Vice President for Public Affairs for Invenergy, covering our transmission portfolio. And I'm based in Des Moines, Iowa. It's a pleasure to be here in Kansas today. I look forward to speaking to you today about Invenergy's work in Kansas, the Grain Belt Express electric transmission project, and the enormous benefits it will deliver to Kansans, and the concerns our company and I know you have heard from stakeholders regarding the Department of Energy's National Interest Electric Transmission Corridor program. My colleagues and I are also prepared to answer questions following this presentation. To introduce Invenergy, we are an all-of-the-above American energy leader with a proven track record over more than 2 decades. Invenergy was founded in 2001 and has built an industry-leading platform deploying technologies including natural gas, solar, wind generation, energy storage, electric transmission, and solar manufacturing. We are headquartered in Illinois and have successfully developed over 200 utility-scale projects. These projects total more than 33 gigawatts, or more than enough power for 12 million homes. Invenergy has an unmatched financing track record in the power sector, having completed over $65 billion in transactions. So the 2 fastest growing occupations in the United States of America are wind technician and solar panel installer. Straight west on I-70 near Hayes is where Invenergy first began helping to bring those jobs here to Kansas. That was back in 2010 when we began development of the Buckeye Wind Energy Center that came online in 2015. Invenergy has completed construction on 3 projects in Kansas, has 2 projects actively in construction, and numerous others in development. Our Kansas development portfolio includes wind, solar, storage, and transmission projects, and we are actively prospecting natural gas power generation facilities in the state. Invenergy believes staffing projects locally with full-time teams versus traveling maintenance teams that some others rely on is the best approach. In Kansas, we employ 21 technicians, operations managers, and site administrators. About 2/3 of our technicians at the Buckeye Wind Energy Center are graduates of the Wind Energy Technology Program at Cloud County Community College. In all, our Kansas projects generate about $30 million annually in payments to counties, local contractors, landowners, and workers. That does not include the enormous benefits of the Grain Belt Express transmission line. No infrastructure project will do more for the Kansas economy or do more to address the growing U.S. electric grid crisis than the Grain Belt Express. This is the highest capacity transmission line in the United States of America at 5 gigawatts, roughly equivalent to 4 nuclear power plants in capacity. The line is the longest that the U.S. has built in more than 50 years at 800 miles. It is the only line to connect 4 different regions of the U.S. grid, which are SPP, MISO, AECI, and PJM. We're talking about a reliability backbone that will open imports and exports across regions to move electricity from where it is available to where it is needed. I want to leave you with a few key points today. First, Grain Belt Express has followed all existing laws in Kansas. Second, Kansans will benefit from Grain Belt Express, including seeing the bulk of economic investment from this project. Third, Grain Belt Express is setting a new and higher standard for Kansas landowners. Finally, this project will unleash the power of Kansas energy to address the rapidly growing need for domestic energy supply. Before I go further on Grain Belt Express, I want to address the issue that has ignited public confusion and concern across Kansas due to the federal government program through the United States Department of Energy called the National Interest Electric Transmission Corridor Program, or NITSE. First, and most importantly, NITSE is no longer happening in Kansas. The Midwest Plains Corridor is gone. This is the result of Kansas stakeholders, including members of this body and ultimately Invenergy, urging DOE to withdraw the designation. I will spend more of my time addressing this topic today than any other today. All of the facts that I will address do not change the reality that this federal program has created significant and justifiable confusion, concern, and anger among Kansans. We have heard extensive feedback from Kansans on this issue, including frustrations, especially around incomplete or no notice provided by DOE to landowners, as well as limited public comment timelines, not to mention the specter of federal eminent domain authority. None of this can be undone, but as of DOE's withdrawal, the Midwest Plains Corridor in December, concerned Kansas can be certain that this is now behind them. To be clear, Grain Belt Express and NITSE are not the same. Grain Belt Express is a transmission project with a route that is already approved and a right-of-way that is approximately 150 feet wide. NITSE is a federal government program administered by the U.S. Department of Energy. Among 10 different corridors initially considered, the Midwest Plains Corridor included Kansas and was a 5-mile wide corridor where transmission development could take place by any developer now and in the future. As the first map on the left side of this slide shows, the Midwest Plains Corridor overlapped the approved route of the Grain Belt Express, and I will address why that is. In December 2023, DOE issued guidance confirming that transmission facilities sited within final NITSE corridors would automatically qualify for funding under DOE's Transmission Facility Financing Program. This guidance also confirmed that projects within final NITSE corridors would not automatically qualify for a federal transmission construction permit. That is what carries with it federal eminent domain authority. A federal transmission construction permit could only be secured after a final NITSE designation is made, after a project has applied through any existing state siting review process, like what Kansas has, and then only after a subsequent filing and review are completed before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. To underscore, this is a final NITSE corridor designation. A final NITSE corridor designation would not have granted automatically federal eminent domain authority. Invenergy has a commitment and a demonstrated track record of working through state transmission siting processes. Grain Belt Express has no need for a federal construction permit because we have existing approvals in 4 states. Just like any homeowner, agricultural producer, or small business owner considering financing options for a mortgage or for their operations as a business, we evaluate any project financing options available to us. In this case, when DOE first opened this program, we initially submitted applications for all projects in Invenergy's transmission portfolio to be considered. And these applications were rather formulaic. When DOE published the first NITSE maps in May 2024, landowners living in and around the preliminary corridors were not contacted by DOE and had no way to determine whether their land would potentially be impacted. Stakeholders widely felt that DOE's public comment timelines were rushed. These process concerns compounded fears that multiple new transmission lines could spring up in designated corridors backed by federal government land grabs. Invenergy heard from stakeholders immediately about these concerns. But in making our initial application and comments to DOE, it is fair to say we were not prepared for the extent and depth of stakeholder concern this program would cause. After extensive further engagement with local stakeholders, Invenergy then prepared supplemental comments to DOE to respond to the concerns we heard. In these supplemental comments last September, we detailed our interest in a corridor designation based on the financing eligibility. We explicitly committed Grainbelt Express would not seek federal siting authority so long as existing public utility approvals remained in place. We also called for a significant narrowing of the corridor from 5 miles wide to a half-mile wide, and committed not to develop other interregional transmission lines in the corridor. That had never been our interest, but we did want to put that in black and white. Finally, we urged DOE to expand its stakeholder outreach around this program. Despite these steps, significant confusion and concern around the program persisted. And in November, Invenergy contacted DOE to request they withdraw the Midwest Plains corridor from consideration. In December, DOE issued a new map as shown on the right of this slide. And as you can see, the Midwest Plains corridor is now gone. In the end, not a single Kansas landowner has or will have had property adversely impacted as a result of this NHTSA process. Nothing about the corridor being proposed changed anything about the already approved Grainbelt Express project, nor the roughly 1,000 landowner agreements that we have entered into here in Kansas. Despite this, we acknowledge that mistrust and concern here continue to be addressed, that mistrust and concern must continue to be addressed. This presentation today is one aspect of us working to do that. So NHTSA is a program led by the Department of Energy's Grid Deployment Office. That is entirely separate from the ongoing federal review that the Department of Energy is conducting for the Grainbelt Express project, which is led by the Department of Energy's Loan Programs Office. DOE is expected to publish tomorrow the Grainbelt Express Draft Environmental Impact Statement, or DEIS. And to get ahead of potential public confusion, we were successful in working with DOE to include language in all of the DEIS public notices it will publish with the, that it will publish to make sure that it is clear that Grainbelt Express is entirely separate from NHTSA and that a federal energy corridor is no longer being considered in Kansas and Missouri. So we are committed to continuing outreach and communications to make sure this is widely understood. All right, one promise, that's the most I'll talk on any of my slides. Second promise, this is our only eye test for today. So the slides will get easier to read, but I hope all the committee members have access to that. So I won't speak to all the detail here, but it's a timeline of Grainbelt Express since Invenergy was announced as the project buyer in 2018. The top half is regulatory milestones. The bottom half is commercial milestones. Since 2018, Invenergy has secured public utility approvals in all 4 route states. This also included amended approvals in Kansas and Missouri, allowing Grainbelt Express to phase project construction so that phase 1 from Kansas to Missouri not only delivers project benefits sooner, but delivers an equal half of project capacity in the central U.S. through the Missouri converter station. The Kansas Corporation Commission in September last year also approved the line siting application for the Grainbelt Express alternating current collector system. This system will carry power from local generating facilities to the Grainbelt Express high voltage direct current, or HVDC converter station in Ford County, Kansas. On the commercial front, Invenergy has entered into multiple agreements with key equipment suppliers. We are very nearly complete with phase 1 HVDC mainline land acquisition, and we are in advanced negotiations with customers in addition to the existing contracts with 39 municipal utilities in Missouri. At the federal level, Grainbelt Express is a covered project on the Federal Infrastructure Permitting Dashboard through the FAST 41 program and is tracking toward completion of the environmental permitting review and loan guarantee decision later this year. We are anticipating start of full construction for Grainbelt Express Phase 1 as soon as early 2026. At each stage of development, Grainbelt Express has relied on and followed existing statutes in Kansas and elsewhere. As this body considers transmission siting reforms this session, we have no asks to make, other than stability and certainty as we continue to make commercial progress. Each of the 4 Grainbelt Express route states will see a combination of energy cost savings, increased reliability, and economic development. The bulk of economic investment will occur here in Kansas. This investment includes both construction and operations of the Grainbelt Express transmission line, as well as the new build generation expected to be enabled by the line. Overall, in-state economic activity is estimated at $8.1 billion and 19,350 full-time equivalent construction jobs over 2 to 3 year build periods. We have also just completed an updated tax analysis, and our latest estimates are that over its 50-year economic life, The transmission line alone will generate over $500 million in state and local tax revenue. $175 million of that will support schools in route counties across the state. Grain Belt Express does have the 10-year property tax abatement period, but it has a 50-year economic life. And so those taxes shown here, this is the property tax revenue shown here, beginning in year 11. That will include $4 million, during construction, there will be $4 million of construction work in progress tax payments. We have additionally made commitments to counties on the route at a rate of $7,500 per mile, totaling $2.8 million in direct payments to counties at construction. In addition to this massive economic investment in Kansas, energy consumers across Kansas will benefit in two major ways from this project. First, consumers will save $1.2 billion over 15 years as a result of the wholesale market impacts of an additional 5 gigawatts of supply capacity delivered to energy systems that neighbor the Southwest Power Pool that Kansas is part of. Additionally, Kansas will benefit from added electric reliability and resilience as a result of Grain Belt Express. In normal operating conditions, the line will move power from west to east, but a unique benefit of HVDC technology is the ability to precisely control power flows in both directions over a line. As more severe weather emergencies impact regional power availability, Grain Belt Express will have the ability to import power to Kansas from other regions in times of grid strain. And this is not a hypothetical benefit. When Winter Storm Uri occurred in February of 2021, the SPP system Kansas is part of had to initiate emergency load sheds for as much as 2,700 megawatts across its system, including in Kansas. Shortly after, Jay Caspery, who spent 20 years at SPP, including with responsibility for transmission planning, told the Kansas City Star that lines like Grain Belt Express could have been the savior. So the project will deliver significant public benefits for Kansas, but what about Kansas landowners impacted by the project? There are three specific ways Invenergy and Grain Belt Express are helping set a new standard for Kansas landowners that I will speak to. The first is strong rights and protections. The second is minimizing impact. And the third is compensating competitively. The Grain Belt Express Landowner Protocol is a comprehensive and publicly accessible set of policies that govern how the project interacts, communicates, and negotiates with landowners. The Landowner Protocol includes a code of conduct, which governs all communications and interactions by project employees and representatives with landowners and occupants of affected property. It also includes the Agricultural Impact Mitigation Protocol to avoid, minimize, and mitigate any impacts to agricultural land or activities. Compliance will be verified by an agricultural inspector who will be hired to monitor construction activities. Taken together, these policies represent perhaps the strongest set of landowner rights and protections anywhere. We would highlight that in the recent transmission line siting docket before the KCC, Kansas Farm Bureau recognized the Grain Belt Express Landowner Protocol as essential for the respectful and fair treatment of landowners. The project also minimizes impact on Kansas land. By using high voltage direct current technology, Grain Belt Express can deliver in a single line an amount of power that would otherwise require a sprawling network of alternating current lines to deliver. Roughly speaking, an AC system moving the same amount of power would require at least 3 separate transmission lines and 4 times the amount of right-of-way. As you can see in the dark green area, the vast majority of land in the easement area agreement, which is that dark green area, can stay in production. Over 99% of land in that easement area remains in productive use, and only 1% of easement areas are taken up by the structure footprints, which is the area directly below that lattice tower. So we have strong rights and protections, we're minimizing impacts, and we're also compensating competitively. The Grain Belt Express compensation package consists of an easement payment made at 110% of the fair market value of the acreage of the land in easement. That's that dark green area on the previous slide. Landowners receive 20% of this payment within 30 days of signing, and landowners may elect to receive the remaining 80% as either a lump sum or on an annual basis starting at construction. The compensation package also includes a payment for each structure on the landowner's property. For the typical structure, that's going to be for $18,000 for that lattice steel. In some cases, like on the AC collector system where we use a monopole, that compensation amount is going to be $6,000 because of the lesser impact of the single foundation of that structure. The compensation package also includes crop compensation through a payment of 300% of annual crop value paid in year 1 of construction. With a normal land transaction, the amount of the future value of crop compensation is already accounted for in the fair market value of a land transaction. In the case of the Grain Belt Express compensation package, we're paying that easement payment at 110%, and we are also compensating for crops on top of that. Finally, we welcome landowner counteroffers. We will adjust the fair market value basis of the easement offer when landowners provide comps from recent land auctions or other documents justifying higher land values. This competitive compensation package has enabled the project to advance land acquisition with a high level of voluntary signings. Land acquisition under Invenergy began in 2020, and Grain Belt Express has now completed 98% of Phase 1 mainline land acquisition across Kansas and Missouri, with over 96% of agreements having been entered into on a voluntary basis. Land acquisition in Kansas is slightly ahead of where it is in Missouri, and we are now down to a single-digit number of parcels on the main line here in Kansas. Invenergy's commitment in acquiring this project was that eminent domain would be a last resort. We have lived by that commitment. Even in those rare condemnation cases, courts have found that the company worked in good faith to reach resolution and made a fair offer, and the landowner is still paid with the amount determined by a panel of appraisers as prescribed by Kansas state law. In all, Invenergy has paid $12 million in upfront payments to Kansas landowners, and there are over $50 million due at the start of construction. So I've talked about economic and reliability benefits, as well as setting a new standard for Kansas landowners. And I want to close by talking about how this project will unleash Kansas energy at a moment of tremendous need. America faces a power grid crisis that will be the defining energy story of the next decade. U.S. electric demand is projected to grow by 16% by 2029, a growth rate not seen in this century. The share of electricity used by data centers may grow fourfold. All the while, severe weather is causing more outages more often. Grain Belt Express positions Kansas to be a national leader in addressing this crisis. Through Grain Belt, energy produced here in Kansas can power as many as 50 data centers that will help us win the AI race with China. Grain Belt Express meets these needs through market-based investment as a merchant transmission line, where voluntary buyers and voluntary sellers negotiate for energy sales and delivery based on price, rather than involuntary cost allocation to electric ratepayers. U.S. Senator Jerry Moran has outlined a vision for unleashing the power of Kansas energy to help the United States become energy independent through an all-of-the-above energy strategy. No project would do more to accomplish this mission than Grain Belt Express. That concludes my prepared presentation, and I appreciate again the committee having Invenergy here today to talk.
Patrick, thank you for your presentation. I think we'll hold our questions.
Appreciate it.
See what we got at the end. So next on the list, we got Justin Grady. You might stand and tell us who you are.
Well, good afternoon, Chairman Fagg, members of the committee. My name is Justin Grady. I'm the Deputy Director of the Utilities Division at the Kansas Corporation Commission. And I'm also joined by my colleague, Paul Owings, and he's our Chief Engineer. Paul and I are going to tag team this. He's going to take about the last third of the presentation. On the agenda slide now, on slide 2, and I want to, this is just a background or a roadmap of where we're going. We're going to talk about the background of the project itself, and then I've really focused the presentation on commission orders that the commission has previously issued pertaining to the project, as well as the relevant statutory standards that the commission was required to use when evaluating the dockets that were before us. So if you happen to have flipped through the slides, then you know that there's a lot of words in this presentation, and I'm not going to read these slides to you, I promise. All right, but the reason that I did this is what I did is I pulled out block quotes directly out of the commission orders that have been issued over the last 14 years. And I have, there's a link, an active link at the bottom of each one of those orders that you can click and you can go do your own research, see where the support came from each of those orders and the statements that are there. So I meant for this to be a reference material for you, for your constituents as questions come up. And the other thing that I was hoping to accomplish was just, you'll hear sometimes on social media or otherwise, you'll hear people say definitively, as if it's fact, that there are no benefits to the state of Kansas associated with this line. And, the reality is that the commission has went through 4 or 5 quasi-judicial extensive proceedings in which the commission evaluated based on substantial competent evidence, based on expert sworn witness testimony, reams of paper and data and analysis. And the commission has found that there are benefits to the state of Kansas associated with this line. If the commission had made up those numbers or just, decided willy-nilly as to the decisions that were in those orders, then the commission would have been overturned on appeal, and that has not happened in this case. So I just ask that you keep that in mind as you hear the numbers today. On slide 3, this all began when Greenbelt Express requested a public utility certificate from the commission in March of 2007. And pursuant to 66-131, they were required to do that. And I've got the statute listed there. It's pretty straightforward. If you want to build a transmission line, own and operate a transmission line in the state of Kansas, you have to become a public utility first. And what the commission does when they evaluate that is they determine, they question, is this project, this line, in the public interest? Will it promote the public interest of the state of Kansas? The specific details that the commission has found in terms of what level of benefit there is for the state can be found on slides 5 and 6. But just a little bit of background exists on slide 4. This was originally a 3,500 megawatt rated line. It was expected to be operated at 500 to 600 kilovolts. It's an HVDC line. And the commission focused, and I think Invenergy did as well, but the commission focused pretty heavily through all of these orders on the fact that this is a merchant cost recovery line. So this line is not going to be recovered from ratepayers and SPP or through Kansas. It's basically a shipper pays model. The link at the bottom of slide 4 is active. Again, you can go and read that first order in which Greenbelt Express became a public utility. The benefits, where we really get into the meat of the benefits that the commission found in slides 5 and 6. And, I said I wouldn't read these to you, and I'm not going to, right? But what the commission found is, look, there's sort of 3 or 4 sets of economic development oriented benefits to Kansans, from the royalties that will be paid to landowners that are able to host the generation sites that are enabled from this transmission line, to the jobs associated with constructing and owning or operating and maintaining the line, and the jobs associated with constructing the generation that is made possible, and as well as permanent jobs operating and maintaining the generation facilities. At the end of the day, there's a little more detail in the actual findings and, of course, in the studies, but what the commission found was hundreds of millions of dollars of Kansas wages and billions of dollars of economic development activity in the state of Kansas is essentially unlocked by this project. Slide 7 is where we get into the line siting proceeding. So Greenbelt Express in 2013 filed a line siting proceeding. And they did so because they were required to by Kansas statute. And so that series of statutes is 66-1,177 through 66-1,180. And I've got the 2 operative, what I would say, areas of that statute provided here for you on slides 7 and 8. 7 basically just says you have to have this permit. The middle portions of that statute are mostly about notice and what the utility is required to file. But I do want to point out that the commission is required under, this is current law on the books today, 66-1,180, the commission is required to make its decision on these line siting cases with respect to the necessity for and the reasonableness of the location of the line, taking into consideration benefit to both customers in Kansas and outside of the state, and economic development benefits in Kansas. I mentioned this in the House. There's a lot of history that goes into that statute and why it specifically refers to customers outside of the state of Kansas. And it links back to the Energy Policy Act of 2005 That's basically a requirement that, and if your state does not have transmission siting authority in which you can at least consider the benefits of your line outside of the state, then it makes it more likely that ultimately the federal government can come in and take eminent domain, exert eminent domain, and have siting authority. And that's why, if you look up the history of that statute, that's why it's written that way. So slide 9 is just, a little bit more background. By this point in the project, the project had been refined some. It was uprated to 3,756 megawatts, 600 kV DC line. You can see the counties that it goes through. It starts in Ford County, goes sort of north and then east, and ultimately crosses the Missouri border at Donovan County. You can see the commission held 4 public hearings, heard from 56 sworn statements at those hearings. There were 700 people that were in attendance, and ultimately received 2,600 public comments. And again, that's an active link at the bottom of slide 9. You can read that line siting decision. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on slides 10, 11, or 12 because you can read them, and again, they're block quotes directly out of that order. But what the commission found, again, was through more refined economic development estimates and analysis, the commission found hundreds of millions of dollars through tens of thousands of jobs that would be created by this economic development. And the commission was also careful to point out that the purpose of this line was fulfilling, I'm just going to read this portion, to fulfill the further wind development in Kansas, promoting current and past governor's initiatives which support wind development in Kansas, further the Kansas Electric Transmission Authority's mission to build electric transmission facilities in order to export wind energy to other states. And so, I think sometimes people forget that for years in the state, that was a major that was a stated economic development goal of the state of Kansas, was to develop transmission and build additional wind energy and use that as an economic development engine in our state. On slide 13 now, it's a little bit more recent. Essentially, this is where Invenergy requested to acquire the assets and the certificate. There were no assets yet, and it required. This is where Invenergy filed an application to acquire the existing development work that had been done and the certificate of the Grainbelt Express project. They were required to do that pursuant to 66-136, and you can see the specific factors that the commission evaluates in a merger like that enumerated in both slides 13 and 14. The commission did that. They went through each one of those mergers standards in that order. And again, on slide 15, basically the commission said there's no reason for us to retest our previous finding that this line will be beneficial to the state of Kansas. Actually, the commission reaffirmed its earlier findings and stated that alleviating some of the excess capacity issues in SPP would overall, at the end of the day, benefit Kansans. It's focused on the economic development benefits as well. On slide 17, is, and just sorry, quickly, there is an order again to that order approving the acquisition on slide 16. So on slide 17 is our second most recent Grainbelt Express order that the commission has issued. And this pertains to the certificate revision that you heard Mr. Withy refer to. In this instance, the commission, Invenergy came before the commission and asked to upsize the size of the line from 4,000 megawatts to 5,000, basically utilizing advanced technology and advanced advanced conductors that could carry more energy, and then also splitting the project into 2 phases. The 2 phases being independent of one another and economically viable, absent, obviously you can't have phase 2 without phase 1, but phase 1 is an independent project and economically viable on its own. And that request also was to increase the amount of the power that was going to be delivered in Missouri to 2,500 megawatts. You can see on slide 18, Basically, what the commission said there is there's no material changes to the Kansas portion of the project that would lead this, change this to where it doesn't benefit the state. And ultimately, allowing this two-phase approach will increase the likelihood that the project gets built and allow those benefits to flow to the state of Kansas faster. There's an active link again to the order on slide 19, and then that bullet point on slide 19 is just, it's a typo, and it is it's just duplicated from the third bullet on the previous slide. Okay, so now I'm on slide 20, and I'm just going to take a quick moment here to try to explain, why it is that, and this is a question we get frequently. I'm sure, some of you have this same question, and it's a completely fair question. How is it that putting 2,500 megawatts or 5,000 megawatts of wind on a transmission line in southwest Kansas and then bypassing the SPP system and dropping it in central Missouri, how can that benefit Kansas and my constituents and my customers? And the reality is that it does, right? And the reason that it does is because in Kansas, we are not an island. Really, the only islanded off power grid that we have in the continental United States is in Texas. And so we are part of a regional transmission organization through SPP, that 14th state region. And broader than that, we're part of the Eastern Interconnect. And so what that means is that when power gets built or a power line goes down or a generation plant gets put on in Missouri, that can positively or negatively affect what happens in Kansas. It's just the reality of the situation. And so this is not just a theoretical idea. The map that you see is actually a real-time snapshot of congestion last Monday morning at 7:25 when I was putting this presentation together. And what you see there, that is just, those colors are, that's just wholesale power prices in terms of dollars per megawatt hour. The redder or yellower portions of the map are higher cost wholesale power. And anytime you see those colors sort of dramatically converging like that, those are severe areas of congestion on the system. And there's real costs to that. There's reliability costs to that. There's wholesale power price costs to that and consequences. And that congestion exists all along the seam between SPP and MISO. And day in and day out, you can go to the website and look, and you'll see that congestion. It'll shift a little west, it'll shift a little east, primarily because those transmission lines, they don't know that there's a state line there between, the electrons on those transmission lines are moving back and forth as they want to with supply and demand all day long. And so the reality is that there is excess renewable energy, primarily wind, that exists in western and central Kansas today. It is causing, there are benefits to that for wholesale power prices, but it also causes reliability issues and it causes congestion, and it is less optimal than it otherwise could be if that power could flow more freely. And so the ability, if there is a transmission line that either relieves that congestion or prevents it from getting worse, and otherwise customers in Kansas don't have to pay for it, the reality is there will be benefits, both reliability and economic, in terms of cost of wholesale power associated with building this line. And so slide 21 is basically just what I just said, but in more summary fashion. And so that's it. I appreciate it. Those are the end of my prepared remarks. I do have Paul Owings here to go through the rest of the presentation, and look forward to questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Justin. Great presentation. So next we'll have Paul Owings. He's the Chief Engineer for the Kansas Corporation Commission. Paul, welcome to committee.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm on slide 22 of the same slide deck. So I'll go ahead and get started. My name's Paul Owings. I'm the Chief Engineer with the Kansas Corporation Commission. And today I will be presenting on the Grain Belt Express alternating current collector lines. I'm going to call them the AC collector lines. This is the most recent docket related to this project. It started May 31st of 2024, and it's the second line siting docket. Slide 23. My agenda, I'll discuss the scope of the application, the procedural overview, the determination of necessity, determination of reasonableness, and some of the conditions that were placed within the order. Slide 24. This slide shows a map of the two AC collector lines proposed in this application. There to the north of them is Dodge City. The red line is the Meade to Dodge line, and the blue line is the Buckland to Dodge line. The black line is the DC line. They meet there together. Next slide, please. The purpose of the AC collector lines is to aggregate power from the wind farms and put it onto the DC line, and that'll then transmit it to Missouri and the other regions. The voltage of the AC collector lines was 345 kilovolts. The Meade to Dodge line was 46 miles long, was in Grade, Meade, and Ford County, and had a capacity of 1,200 megawatts. Next slide, please. The Buckland line was approximately 16 miles long and was entirely in Ford County. It had a capacity of approximately 600 megawatts. So the combined capacity of those two lines was approximately 1,800 megawatts, and the total capacity of the DC line is 5,000 megawatts. So additional AC collector lines will be needed in the future to bring in power for more wind farms to fully utilize the DC line. Next slide, please. This slide shows a partial procedural schedule. There was additional events that I excluded, but I just wanted to note that the transmission dockets are fast-paced dockets. There is a 120-day statutory deadline, and I'd also like to discuss a few of the milestones within this docket. So June 20th was the deadline for notice of local hearing. So there's a statutory requirement Grain Belt notify all the property owners within 660 feet of the public hearing. The public hearing was on July 10th, so about 20 days later, we would have the public hearing. The public hearing consists of an open house style hearing, then a formal hearing with the commissioners, and gives us a chance to talk with the public. This is an opportunity for the public to speak with us, often for the first time. 20 days before that, they learned that they were going to get impacted by this project, and now they're talking to us about the implications. And a lot of what we do is inform them of the procedural process and how they can participate in it. But you can see on the schedule that the public comment period ended on July 15th. So the condensed schedule, I think, limits the amount of public participation that can occur. I think I just point that out, and can be somewhat frustrating for the public. Next slide, please. So the commission is required to determine the necessity of the line, and the necessity relates to the benefits. Justin and Invenergy covered a lot of those benefits, so I won't reiterate them in the interest of time. But I think it's important to note that no parties challenged the necessity of the lines. There was no testimony entered or evidence entered that disputed the benefits that were presented within this docket. Next slide, please. The other thing that the commission is required to consider is the reasonableness of the location of the route. One landowner did intervene in the project and objected to the reasonableness of the location of the route and proposed an alternative route that deviated from the proposed alignment for about 3 miles. The alternative route impacted new property owners, and to give those property owners due process, we would need notifications and public notice. There was inadequate time in the docket to do that. However, the landowner and Grain Belt did work out a settlement agreement where they would consider that alternative route in a separate docket. The remainder of the route was uncontested. Next slide, please. So the commission can place conditions on the approval of a route, and the conditions are meant to protect the interests of different groups affected by the route. I'm going to review some of the conditions that were placed on Grain Belt as a result of this docket on the next 3 slides. So one of the conditions was the Grain Belt's required to complete an AC collector system master plan. So I mentioned earlier that more AC collector lines may be required. So they're going to have to develop a master plan that shows where those lines will be located and limits them to a specific geographic area. Another condition that they placed is they prohibited installation of facilities until interconnect agreements were executed with the generators. So at the time of this docket, Grainbelt didn't have interconnect agreements with any generators, so they're not allowed to construct that till they demonstrate they have those interconnect agreements in place. Slide 31, please. Another condition was if Grainbelt does not secure the interconnect agreements within 5 years, the involuntary easements will be returned to the landowners. And the voluntary easements also had a sunset clause in them that protects some property rights. If the project doesn't go forward, then those easements will basically go away. And the commission conditioned it such that they had to consider that alternative route I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. As a result of this docket, the commission required as a condition that they submit oil and gas protocols. Those protocols would outline how Invenergy would interact with the oil and gas industry and had to be reviewed by the commission. And although it wasn't a condition of the docket, several other items emerged as a result of the docket, and that would be the landowner protocols, the code of conduct, and agricultural mitigation protocols. It's our understanding that these have been very well received by other interest groups and were a new thing that was developed as a part of this docket. And next slide, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for having me, and I believe I'll stay here for questions later.
Okay, thank you. Wendy, are you going to say something? Okay. So we got Wendy Grady, Assistant Counsel and Director of Legal Foundation, Kansas Farm Bureau.
Thank
Welcome to
you.
the committee.
Thank you, Chairman Vag and committee members for allowing KFB to provide testimony today on transmission line issues. My name is Wendy Grady. I'm Assistant General Counsel and Director of the Legal Foundation at KFB, and I'm submitting today's testimony on behalf of our members. KFB is the state's largest general farm organization. We have over 30,000 farm and ranch families that we represent through our 105 county associations. KFB has long been recognized as an organization that supports private property rights. Our policy also supports the growth of electric generation capacity and transmission build-out to meet the growing demand for electricity. To that end, KFB has been actively involved in legislation and rulemaking at the state and federal levels where private property rights intersect with utility projects. In my role at KFB, I've had the opportunity to participate in over a dozen meetings across the state, largely on electric transmission and largely focused around the Grain Belt Express and NHTSA's. And what we did in those meetings was generally address what is fact from fiction. If you have any want to dig into that more, you can look at some of the links that we've provided in the testimony and the PDF. All of those resources should be linked. And we provide that on our website too for our members and others. But through those meetings, it became apparent to me that landowner sentiment is changing toward renewable energy and electric transmission. It's also become apparent in our policy book, which has transitioned in recent years from a blanket support of renewable energy to a more balanced support of renewable energy and transmission, but also protecting landowner rights and landowners who may be directly or indirectly impacted by projects. So in response to our member concerns, our KFB board created an energy working group that studied energy issues around the state and made some policy recommendations. Our members adopted over 20 policy amendments and additions to our policy book that helps address some of these energy concerns. Because of those policy and our attempt to get those things implemented for our members, KFB intervened in the KCC line sighting investigation. You may recall that line sighting investigation is largely because of one line sighting application that did not go well. There was a lack of outreach early and a meaningful opportunity for landowners to provide feedback about that line. I think a lot of the parties also felt that they were boxed in by the previous approvals from the SPP, so that when they did receive that landowner feedback, they were unable to make substantial changes to help those landowners and the impact to their residents or their operations. So ultimately, that line was approved in a split decision, but KCC staff recommended that the line sighting investigation be opened. In the line sighting investigation, KFB has advocated for requiring a code of conduct to improve interactions between energy companies and landowners, as well as ag impact mitigation protocols that would help protect ag land in future line sighting matters. Similar types of these protocols have been adopted in other states. I've linked some examples for Illinois. Also, we, in that line sighting investigation, modeled the proposed code of conduct and protocols largely after what of Grain Belt Express has adopted for the HVDC line in Missouri and what they adopted for the AC lines in Kansas. KCC staff has supported that recommendation to require these protocols in future line sighting matters, as well as the Commission's oversight and enforcement authority for that, but they would be less prescriptive about the guidance that what should be contained in those protocols than what we recommended in our briefs in that matter. So our members believe that these protocols could greatly improve the line sighting process. For example, the code of conduct would require truth and transparency when companies are dealing with our members or landowners in general. Those are basic standards that are sometimes not met. To take that a little bit further, that line of communication would continue so that if folks have issues when a proposed line will impact their property, there's a requirement that the utility company come up with some sort of process where they will hear and consider micrositing changes, which I think were pretty impactful in the AC collector line investigation. The landowner protocols would also require more standard compensation for landowners that's based at a rate that's higher than fair market value. And we think that's important because if a party has eminent domain authority, it's not a willing buyer, willing seller scenario, which is what the basis of fair market value is. See what I can skip over in the time, in essence of time. So I'll move on to the ag impact mitigation protocols. The protocols that we proposed in the line sighting investigation really help set standards to protect and restore ag lands after the construction and maintenance of transmission facilities. There would be protocols for the certain soil protection measures to be utilized by companies, like decompaction, fertilization, and erosion prevention. And all of those, they would have to be relying on scientific standards to guide their work. They would also have to control noxious weeds in the easement and address impacts to other ag improvements like drainage tiles, terraces, and irrigation systems. The protocols would also require a transmission company to employ a person that has an ag background, or experience to serve as a point of contact for landowners. So we think that these are important in a line sighting investigation scenario, but also could be impactful in other energy contexts for energy generation and storage. And with the anticipated growth in electric generation and transmission in the state, now is the time to address these issues so that companies that come to Kansas to do business are going to do it right and deal with landowners in a fair and transparent way and protect ag lands. Thank you.
Thank you. We've had some great presentations. I think we could have another hour of questions here. I can feel it. But Senator Bowers has a question. We'll start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to let the committee know and audience members, I have 6 of the 14 counties. And for most of the summer, this is what I did. When we talk about a perfect storm of confusion, this is what this was. And Patrick, could I ask you a couple questions or a few things? So what was happening at home, we had the existing line already from Greenbelt, from KCC approval. Then we had the collector lines with KCC hearings. And then we had the Department of Energy's idea of the big picture of eminent domain, which really just set off a firestorm of taking my land away. So property tax rights. So that's what we were all dealing with. So who was on the front line? That was state legislators who have no vote in this. Our federal delegation who has no vote either. So we have the federal administration saying, here's this choice, and public comment was so limited by the time our constituents figured out what was going on. So I do have a question here, Patrick. But going on, what we did in rural Kansas, and thank you to Farm Bureau, because we were trying to have forums to set this record straight on really what was happening. And if I had to regret, Patrick, I wish you were more involved in our conversations because you totally were being the bad guy here when something was already existing of confusion that the federal government was doing. I wish I had seen more of our federal delegation folks because people were mad at state legislators. Very, very difficult place to be. Thank you to Justin for coming and explaining this was already existing. So that was just really important. I am glad to know that you withdrew your name from this consideration. That means a lot to me because you were part of all of this big scenario going on. You know, our constituents were worried. Their land was going to be taken away. County commissioners passed lots of resolutions. If one thing happened about this is we know what our county commissioners are thinking about eminent domain. So that's very important for us to remember of what came out of this. I did want to say to Farm Bureau with their information, trying to, when you said it, Wendy, straight facts from fiction was what we were doing all summer. It was very discouraging, and people were angry at us that we weren't able to do anything. So, so just so you all knew what was happening with this, and to the city folk, this was very emotional at home, very emotional. But does any of the energy that's going through these lines stay in Kansas? Does it all leave the state? Is it just being transferred through, Patrick?
So the line using HVDC technology has on-ramps and off-ramps. And each of those on-ramps and off-ramps are the converter station. So the converter station in southwest Kansas in Ford County, that's where the power will go in. The next off-ramp is at that Missouri, north central Missouri drop-off point. As Justin was describing, the systems that north central Missouri converter station delivers to do have some amount of connectivity to the SPP system that serves Kansas. So it can alleviate that congestion and there can be electron flow that ultimately comes back to that SPP system that serves Kansas. But because of the configuration of the line, it does have those off-ramps and off-ramps, the on-ramps and off-ramps. And I think just going back to one point I made in my presentation, there are trade-offs here where there aren't those points for local delivery, but because we're using DC technology, it is an enormous, a much larger amount of power flow that is possible than you would otherwise be able to have with alternating current. Or conversely, you don't have nearly as much impact on the land and on landowners as you would have if you were designing the same type of system using alternating current technology where you might have three lines, you know, that move power that this line can move.
I hate to cut this short, but we're due on the floor at 2:30.
Understood.
I want to thank you all for being here today. I had 3 more questions, and I'm sure we had 10 more of that, and I had 3 or 4 of my own. But thank you, and I think this is some great information. And
Thank you to the committee. We're happy to continue to have conversations with all of you. Thanks.
all right, thank you. Meeting adjourned.